And welcome to Weather Geeks. I'm Dr. Marshall Shepard from the University of Georgia, and we have a treat for you today because we have what I classify as a legend of our field, and he may agree or disagree with me, but we have Gary Kowski. He's a retired meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Mount Holly, New Jersey. Is that right?
That's correct.
You may know Gary, one, because he's just great in social media. Make sure you're following him if you're not. But he also gained legendary status because of a personal plea that he gave during Superstorm Sandy or Hurricane Sandy. Gary, tell us about that. I want to start right there. You had this personal plea. Tell us about that, and I think we'll see it up on the screen. What motivated you to go there with that plea?
Yeah, what we saw, obviously Sandy was, gaining a lot of attention and obviously looking more and more ominous. And the governor of New Jersey was actually calling for people to evacuate. And we didn't see people evacuating as much as they had, as we would like to have seen. And what we thought was happening based on some of the comments we're getting was that people were remembering the previous year was Hurricane Irene. 2011 was Hurricane Irene. Storm surge wasn't that bad with that storm. The main story with Irene for New Jersey was the inland river flooding. And so a lot of people, it seemed like a lot of people were ready for Irene round 2. They weren't really understanding that the threats, every hurricane has all these threats, but sometimes one is worse than the other. And with Sandy, the surge was just going to be the huge story, and people were not picking up on that.
I want to just read some of what you said, and hopefully you can see it on the screen. If you're still reluctant to evacuate, think about your loved ones. Think about the emergency responders. I mean, you were really concerned about this event, and with the backdrop of what you just explained, this isn't normal protocol for the meteorologist in charge. Did you face any kind of blowback later for that, or did your constituents really appreciate what you did?
Yeah, all the feedback we got was positive about all the service that came from the Weather Service office in Mount Holly, but certainly any reference to the personal plea. And actually, the positive feedback we got from Sandy in terms from our customers and the general public exceeded anything that happened. I was there at Mount Holly since 1997, so any weather event that occurred during that period, this dwarfed it in terms of positive feedback.
Now, one of the big challenges is that there was this whole thing about whether the Hurricane Center could issue warnings on this storm, and that was part of the mix, and I think we learned from that with recent storms. Tell us about the particular challenges for Sandy, and then transition to, do you think we learned our lesson recently with Hermine, for example?
Right, well, and again, going back to Irene, the Weather Service does service assessments, and one of the things from Irene back in 2011 was that we find people get confused every time there's a label change. When we go from hurricane to tropical storm, people have expectations, and they don't line up very well in many cases with what meteorologists want to convey.
We get stuck in our semantics sometimes, and people don't care about that.
Exactly. One of the things was that the results from that survey was that don't change the headlines any more than you have to. So what we wanted to do with Sandy was try not to do any more headline changes than before. So what we wanted to do was avoid having hurricane warnings up and then 6 or 12 or 24 hours before landfall, change them to something else, high wind warnings or whatever, because we've done that before. And now, and with Irene, we saw that that was a problem, and so we were trying to do something different. Now, a better approach now, because now there's policy to support it, I think we learned our lesson, was that the Hurricane Center, the National Hurricane Center down in Miami, can actually now keep hurricane warnings going for a storm that's no longer technically meeting the definition of a hurricane, but still has hurricane-like threats, which means hurricane force winds, major storm surge, major inland flooding. Basically, now don't get hung up on some textbook definition.
Absolutely.
Get hung up on how it's going to affect people.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of one of the lessons learned, we have evolved these new storm surge products. We saw this storm Hermine, and I saw Angela Fritz from Capital Weather Gang at a recent conference talking about the various names, 6 or 7 names that we had for Hermine. But I think we did learn some things. The storm surge product, it was sort of debuted, if you will. It's an experimental product still. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's absolutely, we're moving in the right direction, and obviously practice does make perfect, and so, and there's nothing better than real life events. So I don't want to make it sound like we're just, the Weather Service is just trying stuff for the first time. There's been a lot of canned scenarios and, playing with data sets to see how this will work, and prototypes have been shown to people and to get get feedback. But there's nothing like playing. You know, you can practice as much as you want on the practice field, but then you got to play the game.
Exactly.
You know, you got to get out there and do all 4 quarters. You know, and so you got to. So real life events test the system in ways that you know you just can't really. It's hard to simulate. So something I think that we're doing well shows good promise is this storm surge inundation graphic where we show the area that's going to be flooded and how deep the water is going to be on a map that you can kind of zoom in on and you know get to some pretty good level of detail. That was, if you were to say, what was the one thing during Sandy that we didn't have that I would have you know given anything for, that would have been that map.
And we do have that.
We do have that. The other thing that's really kind of new, other than sort of being tested in the background, is this prototype storm surge watch and warning product. Some of the folks, some of the more avid followers of the weather saw that come out, you know, during Hermine, and you might have been wondering about that title or what that means. And actually, the desire for that product actually goes back all the way when Bill Reed was director of the Hurricane Center.
Sure.
He was talking with his counterparts at FEMA, and they were concerned that where the hurricane warning isn't necessarily where all the storm surge that you're going to have to evacuate people from is going to be. That, you know, a hurricane warning is defined by the wind. And sometimes the surge arrives ahead of the wind. Sometimes it's hitting a broader area than just the wind field would suggest. And that depends on the size of the storm, the speed of the storm. So the storm surge warning is, I think, an interesting idea to be tested. You know, if I had we're doing both. You know, for me, I'm more passionate about the inundation graphic, the first thing I mentioned. But we're going to do the watch and warning, and we're going to see how that works. It's going to highlight portions of the coast and say, here's where we think storm surge is going to be a bad problem. And, you know, and storm surge is the #1 killer for tropical storms and hurricanes. That is the #1 threat to people. So it is something to worry about very seriously, and we'll see how it works.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because we certainly do hear a lot of focus on the wind in these types of storms, but really it's the water, storm surge inundation, and even inland freshwater flooding that's most dangerous with these storms. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about the storms that weren't. How can forecasters prepare for the worst while still maintaining the trust of the public? The cry wolf syndrome. We'll talk about that next, but first, our Geek of the Week.
This week's Geek of the Week is Justin Osceola, founder and publisher of Jersey Shore Hurricane News, a two-way news outlet for the people, yes, and by the people. Justin enjoys tracking and live streaming thunderstorms to the Jersey Shore, and when the surf is up, you can expect to find him in the water. He loves it when there's a huge storm offshore that sends waves crashing to the coast. No wonder his favorite meteorological term is bombogenesis. Congratulations to Justin Osceola on the Geek of the Week.
And we're back on Weather Geeks, and we're talking to Gary Kowski, formerly of the National Weather Service, and still one of the best weather followers out there on Twitter if you're in social media. And I want to talk more about Hermine. What were your thoughts on the uncertainty, particularly as this storm transitioned from a hurricane to a post-tropical system? Was the messaging okay? How did we convey the uncertainty, and what do you think the public's perspective on this was?
Yeah, I think obviously a lot of folks, if you're going to kind of jump to the what didn't go so well or what didn't play so well, you know, we really did step on, you know, the holiday, you know, and there were a lot of folks who were not happy about, you know, the impacts of the Labor Day weekend.
Especially on the Jersey coast.
The
Much
Jersey
of that
Shore
was shut down for the most part.
Yes, and so, and I was personally affected. My family, my son and daughter-in-law were going to invite us to come down. I have a 16-month-old granddaughter. We're going to go down to the Jersey Shore. We had to postpone the first day of that because we talked about the threats, and we decided just to hold off a day, and then we went down while it was still, you know, doing it. Hermine was still doing its thing, but it was further off the shore, and the weather was actually getting a little bit better down at the Jersey Shore. But yeah, you know, I was a weather consumer as well as a weather forecaster at that point. But yeah, you know, I think that given it was a difficult forecast, it's unusual. Just as Sandy was an unusual track back in 2012, this whole business with Hermine kind of going out to sea, it's like and it was like a rubber band was grabbing a hold of it, and it was stretching out, and then it was going to pull it back. And in some cases pull it back to the Jersey Shore. And I was talking on social media about some of the implications of that. Again, a lot of folks that are watching the show know the European model is well regarded,
sure.
and about 96 hours before it was supposed to do this kind of return back closer to the Jersey Shore, the European model had wind gusts of hurricane force, so wind gusts over 75 miles an hour, brushing the New Jersey and Delaware coast, which would be terrible.
Yeah.
And if you're a vacationer, it would be even worse. If that had happened, people, emergency managers would want to have those people out of there.
So yeah, we know that there were certainly some uncertainties with the models, and there was a messaging challenge, particularly in the fact that it was a holiday didn't help the situation any. But from your perspective, is there anything message-wise or forecast-wise that could have been done differently?
Well, I think it's a good explanation, how there is still forecast uncertainty. I think it's really more a test. Actually, I would lean a little bit from saying, okay, the Weather Enterprise do something different, Weather Service do something different. It's kind of like more general public. How do you want to be able to, how do you want to handle these serious threats that, weather forecasting is not perfect. We all know that. So there's going to be times where something really bad could happen. How do you want us to tell you that so that you can make good decisions when you're in a tough situation? Now, all this information was going out, with Hermine, but really, what I saw was when those rain bands came up and there were some tropical storm force wind gusts that weren't hitting not just Delaware, but came up to Cape May, New Jersey, and starting to hit Cape May County. I was watching Google Maps. I was watching a lot of stuff. I was watching Google Maps. All the roads turned red going north out of Cape May. Vacationers, and this is the Saturday of Labor Day weekend, they self-evacuated.
Right.
They heard all the weather information, but when they actually saw the bad weather outside, that was sort of a culmination of the decision-making process that caused a bunch of them to self-evacuate.
Now, in about 20 or 30 seconds, quick answer here. We saw something similar with Juno, and you were okay with calling it Juno now. You had a different perspective in the Weather Service? I
was just going to say, now that I'm no longer with the Weather Service, I realize the value from social media of labeling, providing some type of label so that people can identify threads and discussion, the discussion topic on there. So I'm okay with the general concept.
Okay, well, I'll get your thoughts on it more, but when we come back from the break, I'm going to ask Gary, how can you do your part the next time you find yourself staring down with an extremely dangerous weather situation? This is information you can use next on Weather Geeks. And we're back on Weather Geeks, and I want to talk about something again that you did that was extraordinary, I think, by many standards. During what we call Juno, the winter storm of 2015 in January in New York, you issued an apology.
Yes.
An apology. I mean, meteorologists don't, there's no apologizing in meteorology. I guess that's the take up from a movie. It's on the screen now. Why did you do that?
Yeah, what happened was obviously the forecast changed radically for the area that the Mount Holly office serves, so the Philadelphia metropolitan area, almost all of New Jersey, and portions of Delaware, where we're talking about getting, well over a foot of snow, in some cases over 2 feet of snow. And to take Philadelphia, city of Philadelphia, for example, we were forecasting up to 18 inches of snow. They wound up with 1.2 inches of snow. So we were off by a factor of 15.
So it was a bust?
It was a huge bust. It was, and weather forecasting keeps getting better and better.
Sure.
And as a result, our partners trust us more and more, and you see more and more decisions made based on the weather forecast. So we're way past just like schools being closed when it's going to be a very high impact winter storm that we forecast. So there were a lot of chips on the table there, and the bet didn't pay off, in the case. Now again, if you're up toward New York City, they got more snow, and then if you went up toward Boston, they hit the jackpot. So parts of the forecast were fine. Sure. But in my area, what I was trying to do was diffuse what I felt was going to be a bunch of anger, and rightfully so, at a forecast that was way off the mark.
I think that's right, and I think you earned quite a bit of trust in that regard. But I think the public still needs to know that just like a field goal kicker, they might make every field goal kick, but if they miss that one in the bowl, people certainly will remember that. And I think we were dealing with that. Our science is still pretty good. Now I want to pivot here because you're big in social media. The way we message has changed in terms of weather. Yes. Why do you feel that social media and some of the newer techniques that we have are effective?
I think we have to see where, what people are using and where they're going. And again, a lot of, folks, we know a lot of people are not, sitting around to wait for weather information at a certain point in time.
Right.
We're very much now a consumer society that wants it when we want to get the information when we want to have it. And so social media is an interesting way to try to do that. One, you can post information, whenever you want to. The other thing that I like about social media is that I feel, again, the Weather Enterprise has just gotten very powerful in terms of a lot of tools, a lot of information, and I feel sometimes it can be hard for even sort of an informed weather consumer to find out what particular piece of information might be most important or relevant to them. So I like to put out on social media, on Twitter, the things that I think will catch people's eye. Hey, did you know now the storm? The wind gusts with the storm are going to be like over 100 miles an hour. Right. Do you see now that we're forecasting this heavy snow could impact this holiday weekend? And point it out to people with enough lead time that they can start to think about it.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things with social science, we found out that people need time to process. They need, if they're going to have to change their plans, travel plans, family plans, business plans, if you can give them some lead time, they're more likely to make a better decision. Talking about it on social media is one way to do that.
Now, sort of in this last sort of minute or so, the next Sandy or the next Hermine or the next big high-impact event, what would you deliver to the next meteorologist in charge there at Mount Holt, at New Jersey, at your former office or at any office? I mean, what is a key lesson learned for you to them?
I think it's just, what strikes me looking back over the arc of my career is just the pace of change and how it's accelerating. And so I think it's critical, rather than giving specific, advice on technical ways to do things, philosophically, we have to get better and better at changing faster and faster. Someone asked Wayne Gretzky why he was such a great hockey player, and he says, I skate to where the puck's going to go. The puck is accelerating. For the Weather Enterprise, the puck is going faster and faster. We all need to try to figure out where it's going and get there.
I've got to end the show on that because I think that's a really nice analogy and a nice mental model for people to take. We really thank you for joining us. Very much a legend in our field. And we're here every Sunday on Weather Geeks. Don't forget we're on Twitter at WX Geeks, TWC, and we're also on Facebook. We'll see you next week on Weather Geeks.